Good evening. We are in Titus chapter 2, and we are just leaving off verse 3. We went into verse 4, and we just began that a little bit last week, but now we get to really get it in to touch it. So we're going to go ahead and read verses 4 and 5 together to get that whole. This is talking about what the older women, though, are to do. And one of the last things we pointed out is that for the older women to be able to do this, they have to have done this. That is one of the key things. He's already given them things that are specific to their age that they needed to be able to do in verse 3, being reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not giving to much wine, teachers of good things. But now he's moving in and he's given them a different responsibility. They need to be able to do those things so that they could do this, that they admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. So, for the older women to be able to teach the younger women to do these things, they had to have done them. They had to know how. You know, it's one of those basic principles of teaching is you can't teach what you don't know. They needed to know these things, and so the responsibility now goes and says, okay, older women, you've gone through this. You've lived through these kind of things, and you've demonstrated these things. Now, there's an added responsibility for you. Help the younger women do the same. But before we get into the specific words, we need to consider something else that's implied by this. Because there's something that sometimes we forget. The older women have to be prepared in life, in demeanor and looking out, that they're ready to be able to teach the younger women. They have to have done that. But what else has to happen? The younger women have to be willing to listen. This process that is described here only works when the older women are willing to prepare themselves and to pass on what they've learned in their wisdom and their experience and have a good attitude in doing that for those who are younger. But it also is required by the text itself that younger women be open and even eager to listening to this kind of guidance from older women. Now, realize that the older women that they're supposed to be open to are this type of older woman, right? That is, we realize that matters. It's not just every older woman that a younger woman needs to say, okay, well, you're older than me, so I guess I have to listen. No, it's this type of older woman. A godly older woman, someone who has demonstrated these kind of characteristics, and therefore you can see, okay, she can help me. With all of that being kind of laid out to understand and appreciate it, we look at what she is to do, and that is that they admonish the young women. I believe I mentioned at the end of class last week that the idea of admonish, there's not the normal word for admonish, but it's returned to this phrasing that we've seen multiple times already in the book of Titus. And that is to the idea of a sense of prudence, of being willing to look down at the long haul and think through things, rather than just assume and quickly go about our business and fly off and say, I'm good and fine. But rather, this has to be taught. That older women need to teach younger women that they need to think through what they're doing and that there are consequences for decisions, and we need to look at the long term. What do we really want? What are we trying to accomplish? How can that happen? What can we do? And be willing to work it out over a process with patience and diligence and good attention. that is not a characteristic that is typically normal or something that is just, that's just not a personality trait that many people have. This is just how we do things. It needs to be learned. And specifically, though, there's a process and there's a lot of practical things. That's this other word, it has a lot of practicality to it. Because when you look at what it says the younger women need to be, you look at it and it says, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, what have we said all along on all of these characteristics we've been looking at, beginning with the elders? We need to know what it looks like. And one of the things that's hard is we think because we know those words, that means we totally understand what it's talking about. But to really understand it means, okay, give me some examples of what that looks like in life. And to be able to think through it, because it's going to look a little bit different at different times in life as your life changes. That's the background of how older women have such value in passing this on for younger women. So now let's take a look at specifically what it is that needs to be taught. And that's the other thing. Can you imagine that these have to be taught? The first thing is they admonish the young women to love their husbands. Now, it could be a lot of fun for me to ask for a show of hands for how many young people understand why you have to be taught to love your husbands. So that's a nice check to see how everyone's doing. Yeah, I understand. I get that. That's not easy. But what does it really mean here? And why, and more importantly, why does it need to be taught? Love your husbands. We just assume that's going to be there, right? Why do we assume that's going to be there? Okay, good. That's a good starter. We don't often consider what kind of love he's referring to. Whenever you look at the model in America, we tend to start with romantic attraction and kind of work our way back to I can put up with them. Okay, that's the American model. But if you trace the nature of love, is you end up with this idea of it's the romantic, attraction and beautiful and all this, all right. And then you go from there to, okay, well, we just belong together. Right? And then or you might say, well, it's probably first it's we're friends, and then it's we belong together. And then because of that, I get commitment. Well, this is actually one word, one term. They're shoved together as they often do in Greek. But it's a combination of husband, which is male, and the word for love that is philia, which is friend. So the point is learn what it is to have a relationship with your husband. Be a friend, but in that sense of really be able to get along with your husband. Now, what would have been true somewhat during this time period? They could have had some arranged marriages. So you have that aspect to this. So now you got this, and you've got to now learn how to get along with somebody. Now, in fact, the process is still going to be the same no matter the culture. That you have to learn this about how do you get along, because it's different, right? It's a different thing. What does it take to be the right kind of friend that your husband needs you to be? And how do you learn to, because the whole point is, this is someone who's very different from you. Those early problems we often get into is we think that we're really showing love and we're doing exactly what we would want. which shows we don't know the other person very well, because that's not what they want. And having to come to an understanding of who that person is and what they understand love is and what makes the relationship work for what we can give them, and I'm willing to do that even though that's not as natural for me. And I'm willing to step out and do some of these other things, and he enjoys this and doing these kind of things, and he would appreciate these kind of things. Those are things that are not necessarily, they're not obvious, they're not natural. And let me explain now why we have to work on it in America. All right, ladies? It's because of the nature of our dating process, okay, which works like you go and do things that you both enjoy doing together, right? Oh, not exactly? No, you do things that, he enjoys this so much and I enjoy being with him, so we're going to go and do this together. He thinks you enjoy it. And then you get married, and all of a sudden you don't actually enjoy that so much. You're around him enough as it is. Right? So you don't need that extra time. So we can set aside that, and okay, we're good, right? He's confused. You see, we think as men that you really do enjoy sports. We think you get that. That's not, see, that's one of those things, and understanding that some of those things that are built in that, there's part of having that relationship and understanding about that we don't need to, you can't just throw everything off and jettison and marriage. Matter of fact, we need to build it a different way than in dating. But you build that relationship with common things and around things that you enjoy where there is a regular positive interaction. And from what I've observed from the outside and also in counseling couples, this is not something that comes automatic to many people. And it's only those who've shown that they know how to do that, make those adjustments, that everything can work out. Now, is it okay if I give an example that I observed growing up, Mom? One of the things I was amazed at, my mom, cooking for Thanksgiving can be a big deal. That's a huge meal to put together. You have to get up early, do all these things, right? The ability to time it so it comes exactly at halftime. I'm telling you, that's a high-valued skill that is not marketed enough. You know what I mean? Is you time that just right, this huge meal, and boom, it's ready. Okay? But I wanted you to understand through those kind of things is that to understand the way the other person thinks and to respond and to give and to be around and to learn to value them and to work those into the relationship, that's what helps cement things long term. And you need someone who's shown they know how to operate through some of those and explain. Sometimes younger women need an older woman to explain the way a man thinks and how to make those things work. And that, yes, you do need to do some of these things, okay? That's normal for what married people need to do. And that's why there's such value in it, rather than saying, well, what would she know? Well, she's been married a long time. That's what she would know. The next one, though, is even more interesting, isn't it? Because apparently, young women need to be taught to love their children. I'd like to say that everyone understands this if they've ever been up in the middle of the night with a screaming 2-year-old. But that's really still not what this is talking about. It's the same prefix. You see, getting up for, in the middle of the night feedings, that's closer to agape love right there. I'm doing what I can to develop the love for this. Total needs is one side, and we're going to do this. But this is what it's going to take to have the right kind of relationship with that child. And to remind them, for example, that the mother having a relationship with the child depends upon, number one, remembering she's the mother. And that if you think about it, there's a, if I wanted to look long term at someone who is older, why this would be so important, is that it's important for the mom to make sure she's always the mom, and the child knows the child is a child, and that's the relationship. Long enough until where they can get older and on their own, where that's where real friendship can develop because of the other. Instead of trying to be so much of a friend early that there's no parent relationship there. You need both in your life at the right times. And what it takes to be able to have the give and take and to be able to understand what children are needing at a given time. Of maybe, you don't get a whole lot of the specifics on different ways to discipline in Scripture. You get the principles in Proverbs, correct? We find the principles, everyone goes immediately, right, without the rod. But that's really talking about the idea of measuring and that, yes, ultimately a corporal punishment, but it's really understanding that child needs discipline. And one of the things that I've learned, and don't ask my mom about this because I learned too the hard way, but it's about the nature of discipline, and that is you have to be extremely creative to be a parent. Because a child can adjust on a dime to whatever, little thing was taken away, and all of a sudden that's no longer the most important thing. 3 times you take it away, and all of a sudden it doesn't exist in the child's mind, and you have to start over. And they don't tell you that in the books. You have to be creative. All these different things are the practical implementation of what it takes to have you want your children to be able to have a relationship with you when they're old and out of the house, not just when they're young and they don't have a choice. And sometimes we think that because at that moment everything's good because they don't have a choice, that they're ready for later. And it's hard. One of the hardest, the most important things I think that older women should be telling younger women in both regard to this is that it's not going to always be easy. And you're fooling yourself if that's what you set yourself up for. That it's work. It's work to have that relationship with your husband. It's work to be able to develop a relationship with your children and get them to where they can. One of my favorite things is, I don't know if my mom still has it or not, was that I got one, just as your children get fit to live with, they're living with somebody else. Right? Because you just get them to that point, right? But that's what your goal is. And you can have you still have a good and it's growing relationship. That's not going to come naturally. It comes through wisdom. Wisdom comes through experience. And we've not done a good enough job about seeking out that wisdom from others and being willing to pass it along. Now let's go back and think one more thing. What do you have to do? If you're going to be able to have an older woman talking to a younger woman about these kinds of things, what do they have to have? Well, the older woman has to have some experience, yes. But what do the two of them have to have? A relationship. You must be willing to build a relationship within the Christian family to where this level of discussion can take place. That you can build a trust up to say, this person knows what she's doing. And to be able to talk and have those kind of discussions and open up. that is what's presented here, and it's just an implication of the text that so often we either take for granted in the church or we act like we don't need in the church. And I think I've seen both, in different places. But this is what it's supposed to be like. It takes a lot of humility for someone who's younger and a lot of trust to be willing to approach an older woman, talk about these things, because that can be pretty scary. You don't want to just bare your soul to anybody. You don't want to admit you're having struggles on something to anybody. You certainly don't want to do that to someone who's going to be talking to people about it. And so these characteristics really matter. But go ahead and look. The next thing is said, to be discreet, verse 5. That is the noun form or the adjective form of the word that's translated admonish. You teach her, you're demonstrating it, of teaching her how to think through things, and you want her to get to the point where she has that kind of prudence and discretion herself in decision making. The goal is that she can think through it her own because you've taught her the things to look for and what she's considering, and that she's willing to work a process to think through what is the right thing to do. Why? Because your goal is not to become the person that you have to call up and everything and find out. The goal of this is growth, which means you don't need to call up and ask every time. It's you're learning from the interaction and you're incorporating it into your own bank of knowledge and wisdom as you employ it. That's the goal, to think through things. Chaste, pure, that's the word pure. And it does emphasize high morality. What is an older woman needing to teach a younger woman here in terms of her morality? How to dress, yes. The right way to dress modestly, appropriately. Like the simplest way I like to tell it is that to show you can advertise for your husband at home, but otherwise the not for sale sign should be on, right? And you just say we're not going to do that. And so to make sure that that's clear, to have high standards, but also even how she looks at life. That there's not going to be any question about her, that there's a total trust in her own way in which she's going to conduct herself. He's leaving her alone. Can he trust her? Is she going to do something or say something to embarrass him? She's someone instead that has a purity that is deep within. It's developing. It's a matter of this heart, the nature of this word purity. It's not the word heart, but I'm just talking about how deep it is seated. He starts with the idea of this purity because purity is not just external, right? It starts within, and then it's going to display itself in all sorts of ways that there's an internal sense of who I am as someone that does the right thing and acts the right way, and I'm going to care, my husband, my family, and that these things are what matter. And that the society is not going to knock her off of those things because the commitment is deeper than that. Homemakers. Now, this is interesting depending upon your translation. Does anyone have something other than homemakers for that word? Workers at home. I mean, that's actually a different kind of thing, right? That the word is actually harder than what you would think. because it's another compound word, right? Two words stuck together. And keeper is the root, or guardian. And then the word house, which is also the word used for home. So essentially you have possible, the range could be all the way from housekeeper to homemaker. All that way from the word. It's actually broader. But let's put it within its context of what he's going for. What are all these kind of things that he's saying here? These characteristics. What is the emphasis for all of these characteristics? Say that louder. They're all about moral conduct. It has their spiritual characteristics. Okay? And so sometimes we want to make sure we don't oversimplify what he is saying. I think the best way to look at this, therefore, is in terms of attitude priority. And therefore, a woman should be the guardian of the home. Now, that actually covers a lot of ground. It's a protector. That's different than, make sure that your wife, has a shotgun when you leave. That's not what it's talking about. You protect the house and the goods. No. Should she be as part of this, be able to take care of the house and make sure it's a good place to live? Yes. But the point actually is far more, though I think maybe you'd say that the chore aspect that you could get on this is a subset. It's about making the home, protecting that home, that family. And making that the family is the priority. And why I think this is important is to show that it is not a prohibition on women working, but it is absolutely a requirement of priority, that the first thing that has to be there is that family, that husband and those children come first, and that there's never any doubt about it. That's what she's guarding. And this is where I think that in understanding the principles that are involved are important, is what she's trying to do is that you don't want to get that into where we're moving away, and there's different circumstances that come up that we have to be aware of in things. Okay, I've known a lot of women that some never worked at all, known one that were always working. The question is, though, how are they treating their home? That's what I'm looking for. Is whatever they're doing, are they making sure that that's going to drop for those kids, that those are taken care of? That they're making sure that all their decision making is run around so that the right decisions, priorities, spiritually and otherwise, are revolve around that home. And that's actually the important care, is it's the priority. That can manifest itself in a lot of different ways, and that's where a lot of times we get into the discussions where people disagree, but that's why we have to make sure we understand the principle first. Okay?
This reminds me of the woman in Proverbs, 30?
31.
Okay, 31.
Yes. That's close.
But it seems like everything that you're talking about, that here in the Greek, and what they're talking about for this woman, almost fits that perfect.
Yeah. She is giving her all. She's very industrious. I mean, you're starting with the Proverbs 31 woman is very industrious. She's hardworking. She's taking care of the house itself, but she's doing more than that. She's providing things for different means that help out the family. But that's the center, and that's why in the end that her husband, her children, they rise up and call her blessed. that she has made that environment for them a wonderful place to be. The interactions. And this is to combat somewhat of, you can make sometimes it'll be around and you have to make different choices for a number of reasons. Sometimes they're forced upon you, such as financially, that, this is going to have to work, and that she is doing this job on the side, and the husband loses his job, and she's trying to handle things, and he's doing this. That some of those decisions are made. Okay, we need to be careful in how we interpret this, so that we'd ultimately condemn people for just trying to find the right way to kind of handle a situation. Okay, we need to make sure we don't go there. But it's always going to be about, and there will be different choices people make. But the question is, are they prioritizing the home? Because the reason why we often think about it, but that's the most important spiritual thing you can do. There may be other things because of obligations that you're going to have to do besides that, but make sure that you understand that's first. Because we have gotten to a point in society, and I think we're coming off of it maybe a little, but where it got to where the value, women were somehow acting like they didn't have value if they didn't work outside the home. And someone who stayed and really emphasized the home and took care of the children was treated as if she wasn't working that hard. I'm like, you clearly have not done that job. Okay, so we need to think about, it takes a lot of work to do all these things and make it the environment. There are a lot of different ways that can work, depending upon family dynamics, personalities. I used to love it, though, because whenever I would come home after my long commute across the parking lot, and I've now got to commute, but I didn't do. But you come, and when they know I was coming, and the girls were little, and they would be at the window, peeking through the blinds, waiting for Dad to get home. So I know that someone had primed them. Right? Those don't happen accidentally. Hey, you do this. And it's ready so that we can have, as family. There would be a lot of different ways to do that, is what I'm saying. But guess what? It'd be nice. It sure be nice if you get some pointers from an older woman who'd done it. That sure would make life a lot easier for younger women. But you have to worry and see the priorities in how that works. Because what are they trying to do? What's the goal? This is actually partially comes up in 1 Timothy. The goal is, the way the home is designed by God, is to produce not just children that are, not imprisoned by the time they hit 18, right? We'd like to have higher standards than that. It's that we want those children to be faithful Christians, right? That's the goal. So that's when we're talking about passing on those kind of lessons, and what we're talking about the priorities in the home of how they operate, we can get caught up sometimes on trying to sell this in a very absolutist way about the nature of a job instead of the spiritual point that's being made about family. That's what I'm going to make sure that we understand here. Because you can have someone who stays home and takes care of the house and is not actually guarding the home. And so I want to make sure we understand what his interests are, what his priorities are spiritual, and that we need to make sure that we're working through that. And there is an element here in terms of how the husband is going to play a role in all this, about how that's going to work. But that's what's really important. We're going to stop there over time, but we'll pick this up next week. I mean, think about some other things, examples of these things coming up. I want us to be practical because, again, until we're practical and taking up the challenge of how do we do that, it's just not going to work, and we need to work on it.